Amigas, amigos, estoy aquí con ustedes con este muy especial diálogo que voy a sostener con un gran músico, Nicholas Carter. Nicholas es director de orquesta australiano que ha trabajado con la Sinfónica de Adelaide, con las grandes orquestas de Australia. También ha sido recientemente nombrado director de la Casa de Ópera de Berna, en Suiza. Así que tenemos a un talento joven, excepcional, que además ahora va a hacer su debut en el Metropolitan Opera House, con una ópera contemporánea, precisamente el Hamlet, que vamos a ver próximamente en vivo desde el Met de Nueva York, y que va a ser un gran hito, sin lugar a duda, ese Hamlet de Brett Dean. Brett Dean, por cierto, también compositor australiano, así que ahí hay un gran encuentro entre el director de orquesta y el compositor. Nicholas, glad to talk to you. I appreciate this moment. So, first of all, tell me, how does it feels to have a nice Australian career, and then recently you are having great successes in other opera houses and orchestras. Recently you have been appointed director of Bern Opera House in Switzerland, and then you have this debut with the Metropolitan Opera House. You are still young, a young conductor. If we think, for example, of Herbert Blomstedt conducting at 95 years old, well, you are really young and you have a great career in advance. So tell me your thoughts on this matter.
Look, it's obviously an absolute career highlight and the stuff of dreams to be able to conduct at the Metropolitan Opera. But it's it's the result of many years of hard work and dedication. I've been in Europe actually for about 11 years now. I started my opera career up at the Staatsoper in Hamburg, where I worked with Simone Young. I was a Kapellmeister and a resident conductor there. I then moved to Berlin and spent 2 years full-time at the Deutsche Oper in Berlin. And then sort of guest conducted around at a lot of orchestras and opera companies before moving to first Klagenfurt. I was the music director of an opera house there, and now Bern. And opera is an art form where you just need to accrue enormous amounts of experience, because in any given situation you can only learn how to deal with those situations through experience, because you've got an enormous chorus on stage, you've got a large orchestra in the pit, you've got singers of various degrees of flexibility as well, and each time you're in the opera pit conducting, you're learning and you're adding to your own experience. So I couldn't imagine coming to the Metropolitan 10 years ago and making a debut. I just of course wouldn't have been at all ready. And I'm only here because I've had those years of experience in German opera houses and know this piece Hamlet. I've already conducted a production of it in Adelaide before, so I happened to be sort of at the right place at the right time when they were looking for a conductor for the production in New York, and sort of that met me at an appropriate time in my own musical and career development. So it's an absolute dream come true, and I still have to pinch myself every time I walk into the pit for a performance.
Please share with us how was to work with so great conductor as Simone Young, because perhaps for new generations is really normal to have and see the conducting career of a woman conductor, but 40 years old, 30 years old, that wasn't that common.
No, you're absolutely right. And she's a person of formidable strength of will and character. especially to have made her career as a conductor in Germany, of all places. And Germany was, even in the 80s and 90s, still in some respects quite parts of society still quite conservative. And no doubt she came up against a lot of resistance to the notion, to the idea that a female can be a conductor. Of course, she got through that with the incredible power of her will and personality and sheer musicianship. I mean, she's one of the most naturally gifted musicians I've ever met. She's a phenomenally good pianist. She can sight read anything, and I've seen her sight read spectacularly difficult music with great ease. So she's unbelievably skilled as a musician from that perspective. She's worked with musicians for so much of her life. She, started out in the time-honored tradition as a repetiteur and was assisting conductors. She was working with Daniel Barenboim at Bayreuth and at the Staatsoper in Berlin as well at the beginning of the 1990s. So she, again, just put her head down and worked and made the focus of her career the music and the interpretation of the music, and never made an issue of or a virtue of the fact that she was a female conductor. Although no doubt that was there's no question that would have been an extra challenge for her and for many other female conductors, particularly of that generation. So I learned an enormous amount from her musically. She has a remarkable instinct for particularly for German music, and I did an enormous amount of Wagner and Strauss with her, and she has this beautiful flexibility in the way that she makes music. There are never two bars that are exactly the same. There's never two bars where you're just sort of beating time. There's always this gorgeous fluidity and aliveness and spontaneity in her approach to making music. And so I learned just so much from her.
Thank you for this sharing with us this reminiscence, because she's a great musician.
Of course.
In a sense, your career has also been based and developed in your country town, Australia, in your country and your town. You also you have conducted much in all the Australian orchestras, including Adelaide and Melbourne. How's the health today of the Australian orchestras and the Australian classical music establishment?
Look, post-COVID, COVID has been obviously incredibly difficult for all the Australian opera companies and orchestras. And some are coping better than others, no doubt. But I've been lucky. I was lucky to grow up in Australia, because the orchestras there are really absolutely amazing. And there might be an element of my being an Australian and growing up in Australia. You're always looking over your shoulder to Europe or to America and thinking, are we as good as the great orchestras of Europe? Or dare I, as an Australian, stand in front of the Vienna Philharmonic and conduct a piece of music. But when I arrived in Europe and started conducting around lots of different orchestras, I quickly came to the realization that most of the Australian orchestras are every bit as good, if not much, sometimes much better than a lot of the orchestras in Europe, simply because I think there are so few of them. In all of Australia, there are maybe seven professional orchestras, maybe 8 professional orchestras. And there's an ambition, there's a drive and an ambition. We never take anything for granted. We never sort of think, well, this is our music, therefore we know how to play it. We're always kind of questioning ourselves. We're always wanting to make sure that we're, doing justice to this music. Perhaps because we're somehow on a subconscious level aware that, this music is a European art form, and although much of Australian society is a Western society, of course, but still we're very, very far away from Europe. So we're always sort of asking ourselves or questioning ourselves, are we worthy? So that sort of creates a good drive in us and a good discipline as well. And you know, the music education, the instrumental education in Australia is very good as well. And you know, really the top orchestras in Australia, you know, compete with all the top grade orchestras around the world. It's really amazing.
This question leads me to your relation with Brett Dean. You have a contemporary conductor who also was an important musician with a great orchestra as a player. And then the last 20, 30 years, he has devoted himself to compose. And you know that today there are many lines of composing. Is not, for a composer, is not as easy perhaps as when you were in the 1880s or 1870s. There were 2 or 3 styles in Western music. One was Wagner, the other was the academic with Brahms, etc., etc. But right now it seems that contemporary music has taken many cultural aspects, even of folk art, of in popular music, of jazz, but also can be serialist if you want, or atonal, or even or tonal. So today we don't recognize precisely a type of school, in a sense, and you have in your hands the opportunity to compose a Hamlet that is a really great achievement. Oh.
That's right. I think you know, Brett Dean's experiences with the Berlin Philharmonic, you know, 15 or 18 years with the Berlin Philharmonic, sitting in the middle of, you know, perhaps the greatest orchestra in the world, working week in, week out with the greatest conductors of the world. You know, gave him a perspective on so many different forms of music, and he was always very interested during that time in experimental music. He was always actually composing during that time, doing a lot of electronic music as well. And I think for Brett, you know, how one finds one's own voice, compositional voice, you just look at the world around you, and you know, in Mozart's time, architecture and fashion and society was sort of very well structured and polite and very aristocratic and very, you know, the music wanted to sort of somehow emulate that, or just did emulate that. And the same can be said, you know, at the start of the Romantic era, when, you know, people started to unbutton their shirts and undo their ties and stop wearing wigs, and the music just started to emulate that as well, and just sort of started to sort of express itself in many different and varied forms. And then you look at yourself in the 21st century, at the world, at the chaos in the world around you, and if you were to sit down and write a symphony like Mozart these days, okay, it would be nice music, but what relevance does that necessarily have to our world today? What is it saying, and what is it actually expressing about the world today, other than you know, putting your head in the sand and saying, I want to go back in time 200 years. So Brett Dean's music really embraces the entire world in the way that, you know, Mahler said he wants his symphonies to embrace the entire world. So there are so many different styles and elements to his music making, to his compositional style. There's an electronic element that you'll hear in Hamlet. There are, you know, electronic sounds that appear at certain times through the opera, which give this sort of very eerie background, sort of aura or ambience to the auditorium. There are also, you know, there's obviously a fairly standard Romantic opera orchestra in the pit, where you've got a string section and woodwinds and brass percussion. But then also, in addition to that, he adds different sounds, like there are glass bottles and there are stones being struck, or there's aluminium foil being shaken, or there's marbles being rolled around a tin, things like this, just like new and unique kinds of sounds to sort of throw the audience off in different directions and fascinate the ears, and just sort of make them aware that we're in a completely new sound world here. to try and really encapsulate the uniqueness of Hamlet's mind himself. Hamlet is obviously the great figure of perhaps all of English literature. And he's so multifarious. He's so yes. Indefinable in one way. He's unspeakably intelligent. At the same time, he's very childish. He's unbelievably funny, and yet on a dime he can switch and utter the most profound sentiments on the nature of human existence and human consciousness. So Brett's music also tries to represent that. There's a claustrophobic element to his music making, to his composition, where there's so much going on. The orchestra is playing billions of notes all at the same time, and this kind of represents the claustrophobia that Hamlet feels in the court in Elsinore, but also the claustrophobia that he feels in his brain as well, that he can't free himself, that he can't order his thoughts to work out what to do. And then, through the course of the opera, these sort of ideas, sometimes these leitmotifs sort of recur, which sort of give the piece a certain ambience and a certain sort of subconscious meaning. But at the same time, Brett is constantly throwing new ideas, new sound worlds, and sometimes beautiful harmonies, and sometimes quite challenging dissonances. But there's a point to those dissonances. There's as is said in the play, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. One of the famous lines from Hamlet. And you sometimes hear that in the music. There's something rotten in the sound, which is constantly searching for resolution, constantly searching for meaning and understanding and some kind of graspable, identity in the world today.
How would you describe the vocal music, the music for the opera singers?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. Particularly for the role of Hamlet, and Alan Clayton, who is an absolute genius, who created the role in Glyndebourne back in 2017, and also and is also singing it here in New York. He says it's easily the most difficult piece that he's ever sung. He also sings Peter Grimes these days. He's on stage for most of the 3 hours of the opera, and it's although there are moments of beautiful lyrical writing, there's often quite angular, quite dissonant harmonies as well. So it's very, very difficult to learn. It's very, very difficult to commit to memory. But the challenge is to find reason and to find purpose in those musical gestures that Brett Dean has found. And everybody in the cast will always say, man, this is just so difficult. It's so challenging. But no one in the cast says there's no reason for that note to be like that or for that interval to be like that. There's always great reason and intention behind every single musical gesture that Brett Dean has written.
And you have also a great staging. We have seen some clips, for example, of Ophélie in her madness, full of mud, and with a really atmospherical music, poignant even, I should say. How do you see this match between staging and music that sometimes is not good, not sometimes comes well, but in this case it seems to work really,
yes, I think it works
fine.
really well. The aesthetic of the production is actually quite standard and quite beautiful. It's not set 400 years ago, but rather maybe around the 1950s, but the costumes are quite beautiful and quite standard. The set is then like the interior of a big sort of classical Dutch mansion of some sort. That you get these beautiful big white walls and white windows and enormous doors. And through the course of the production, these panels, this room that you see at the very start of the opera, start to fracture, start to fragment and sort of break up. Also to imitate the fragmentation of Hamlet's mind as he starts to unravel through the course of the opera. So sometimes you see these panels or these walls sort of spinning around upon on one another, and you know what they are. You can identify what they are because you've seen them in their context. But then to see the reverse side of them, is quite sort of dramaturgically interesting, because you're analyzing analyzing every experience from many different conscious perspectives, and I think that's the idea behind Neil Armfield's production. It's a really very, very beautiful and very hauntingly effective production.
Finally, what would be your advice to opera lovers, opera public, about approaching a new musical work? I think it's necessary to have new works, because that tells us that opera is alive. It's not only a place where you represent the great or the historical works. You are also doing something with the art form today, no?
That's right. It's so important for the survival of our art form that we continue creating new artwork. And although this piece might not be as immediately accessible or understandable as La Bohème or Madame Butterfly, all I would say is keep an open mind, enjoy the play for what it is. If there are musical elements that you might not understand or might not like the first time round, stay with it and keep asking yourself, why is the music written like this? How does it underline the psychological drama that's happening on stage? What are these sounds creating to the character? And enjoy the performances on stage. And there's no shame in saying the first time round, I really enjoyed many elements of it, but I'm not quite sure. I didn't quite understand the piece. There are many people who said, for me with this piece, it was love at second sight. It's that to see it one time is baffling. Just like to see the play Hamlet for the first time. There's no way, there's no chance that you could understand every nuance of the play at one seeing of the play or one reading of the play. So sometimes rewatching an opera like Hamlet, you start to appreciate the structure of it, and you start to appreciate the nuance of the music making in there, and appreciate it for the great drama that it really is.
Finally, can you give a greeting to our audience here in Monterrey that's going to see your conducting of course, all the performance of Brett Dean's Hamlet? Sure.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Carter. I'm the conductor for the production of Hamlet by Brett Dean at the Metropolitan Opera this season, and I'm so thrilled that you're all coming to watch the HD broadcast in cinemas there in Monterrey. I wish you great fun with this amazing modern opera. Thanks for being there.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for your time. It was a beautiful talk with you about
Thank you so much for your great questions and for your interest in the piece as well.